Well, good morning. Thank y'all for letting me come speak to you today. Wasn't really planning to mention this, but as I was sitting here thinking through this, every time I talk to a legislative group or somebody that's not really in the business, so to speak, I find myself having to remind folks that as a regulatory agency, as some of the demands our industry has on growers, we're not the bad guys. I played football, and a speech that my offensive line coach gave us one day, trying to psych us up, it's parallels a lot into sort of what we do as an agency. He said, "Boys, y'all are offensive linemen. That means nobody knows who you are, knows your name, and they're not going to unless you get hurt or do something really stupid." And he said, "But you do everything that you do because you know how important it is. You know there's a plan, and you know it all starts with you. And everything back here that's important and everybody sees, it can't go down without y'all doing your job." And part of this morning, we've heard lots of speakers talk about telling the story, letting people know what we do. As an agency, we try to do that. We're trying to help our stakeholders even understand, this is really what we do for y'all. This is what we can do. With our legislative leaders, we try to tell them this is how important Alabama agriculture is. So I'm going to focus on water. A lot of this is going to be Alabama specific, but it's issues I would ask you to think about in your own state. Because each state's different. We're different than California, but we're running into some of the same issues, especially on local areas. We have water everywhere, as y'all will see, hopefully, if I do a good job walking through this presentation. There are areas where municipalities, not large cities, not Birmingham, not Montgomery, but some of our smaller rural areas can't grow because they don't have drinking water. 5 or 10 miles away, there's a lot of water, but they can't get to it because of some of our legal framework. I'm just going to go ahead and throw this out here early on, covered a little bit later. We do not have a lot of statutory law on water usage. Some folks really like that. Some days I like that. There are also those occasions, though, where you look at something and you say, well, shoot, we're stuck with common law ideas that are really old in a modern society. And the only way to get an answer here is for someone to take a risk with their business and hope no one sues them, or take a risk and know you're going to get sued and just be willing to defend it and then hope that a circuit judge who's elected in Alabama is going to find your side on this. And that stops growth. People don't want to do that. People don't want to take the risk. So that's our sort of internal fight in Alabama. As you'll see, everybody says we've got a lot of water. But is it really enough? All this blue stuff, of course, is water. Master's obvious, right? Like the earlier speaker with red is bad. Blue's water. 1/6 of the surface area of Alabama is comprised of lakes or reservoirs. So that's our surface water. 1/6 of it. Mobile, Alabama is the second wettest city in the United States of America. It's right behind Seattle. We get rain in South Alabama all the time. For our crop ag people, they'll tell you we don't get it at the right times. So we've had some initiatives and discussions about ways to store water better, to have it when we need it. The groundwater in Alabama is our, I won't say untapped because it is getting used, but that is our resource that I bet you 90% of the citizens in Alabama have no idea how much groundwater we have. You'll see right here, 533 trillion gallons of groundwater is our reserves right now. That's enough for the state of Alabama to operate at its current usage for over 3,000 years. There are companies that have even talked in experimental research type projects looking at, hey, can we buy water from Alabama and pump it to other states? Well, right now you can't do that. Don't necessarily want them to do that. It's just amazing how that sometimes, and again, I think we're all guilty of this in the ag community, sometimes you don't know what you have. I have some brochures here from an economic impact study that the Extension Service of Auburn University worked with numerous ag stakeholders, and we came up with. And this little document has really been a game changer to some of our ag leaders. We have people that live in legislators. I love this tool with our legislators. I'll sit down with Representative so-and-so and say, you are from Shelby County. You know there's ag there. Did you have any idea that there's this many jobs related to agriculture in your county? Did you have any idea how much poultry there is? There's a website there. You can go in and search every county in the state of Alabama, and it breaks it down. That's been a huge, huge resource for us. But our commissioner has made a point of talking about even among the family, we don't get the message out very well. He will go to a Cattlemen's Association group or a poultry and egg meeting, and he'll just kind of ask everybody, all right, y'all are in Monroe County, Alabama. How many people do you think your industry employs? And folks don't do it because we drive by pine trees and cow pastures and chicken houses, and it's just so-and-so's farm. Nobody realizes how important it is. So groundwater, we don't even get to see. We see our lakes, we see our rivers. People talk about the recreational use, the fishing industry in Alabama. Commercial fishing in the coast is huge. There's some commercial fishing developing on some of the rivers, but the recreational fishing industry is huge. And hunting is big business in Alabama, recreational hunting, and all that depends on water. So we have all this water, but is it really enough? Well, we use about 10 million gallons a day in Alabama. Currently, about 95% of that's surface water, about 5% of that's from groundwater. Mentioned earlier, if you'll see over here, public supply is the biggest user. That's kind of deceiving, though, because there are a lot of poultry houses in the state of Alabama that receive their water from public water supplies, especially in some of our more rural areas. And that's going to become important a little bit later on. So let's just remember that that number, some people look at that and say, well, that doesn't affect ag. Well, I don't know the exact percentage, but some of it does. But when you add all this up between irrigation, aquaculture, and livestock, you're going to have about 200 million gallons a day that we use in Alabama. Okay, on y'all's left here is going to be from surface water, and this is groundwater. See that the stats are about the same. Public supply is still going to be the largest use, but you'll notice irrigation jumps up here on the groundwater as far as one of the big dogs who uses the water. Aquaculture and livestock are going to be in there as well. Putting things in perspective, we heard one of the earlier speakers talk about this. This stuff's just kind of neat. I try to remember a few of these and throw them out to people when they talk about water waste. And y'all got to do better at conserving water, and ag and forest, you've got to do a better job of this. I got you. I don't know how many times. Last weekend in Alabama was about 80 degrees. Kind of culture shock coming up here for the weather. Oh man, everybody was mowing their lawns and outside washing their cars. And little kids spraying water all around the place while mom and dad are, wiping the car. Where's it at on here? Standard water hose uses about 5 gallons a minute. You just let it run like that. Clothes washing machine, 43 to 51 gallons. Garbage disposal, 4 gallons a day. Standard dishwasher, about 15 gallons a day. A family of 4 can use 400 gallons of water per day. So think about all the neighborhoods in your area, in your state. Each house, 400 gallons of water a day. And then multiply that by 7 for a week, by 30 for a month. All right. I did this here so nobody calls me out on it. Agriculture is technically the second largest industry and sector in the state. We're really the first, though, because they add all the manufacturing, including chemical and all that together, and that's cheating. All right, like animals and trees or ag, we're good. So we really should be number one. But as you can see here, it's a $70.4 billion a year economic impact in the state of Alabama. It employs over 580,000 people. All right, you're talking about a state of 4 million folks there. Poultry and egg is our largest ag commodity. As y'all will see, the impact of poultry and egg production in Alabama is $15.1 billion. Everything else below it has millions beside it, and when you add all those up, it doesn't even it barely gets over like a quarter of the poultry impact. Poultry has, hit the wrong one there. Poultry has 34,000 direct jobs through the actual production activities. And we have another 85,000 supported through our processing plants. These take water. They're going to take water. Earlier, another speaker hit on an issue that I'm going to address some now and we'll get to is the feed issue. Not only does it take water for these animals, but it takes water for their feed. Alabama, for a variety of reasons, but we do not have near as many acres of irrigated farmland as our neighbors. Georgia and Mississippi have a lot more irrigated acreage than we do. If every kernel of corn grown in the state of Alabama was converted to feed for our chicken industry, we could only feed our chicken industry for 3 days. So, there's interest from corn farmers about if we could get more irrigation, we could grow more corn, and that would help. But again, geography and some of our legal framework are going to play a role in why we haven't gotten past that. But with what we have, we are the third largest water producing state, 14th in eggs, and a $10 billion economic impact on our state each year. Okay. Good old typical 4-house poultry farm, 40 by 500 broiler house. We use about 450 gallons of water a year. Multiply that by your 4 houses, you're going to be looking at about 2 million gallons per year. There are some places I mentioned that's bought off a public water supply. Which is great sometimes because you don't have to fool with your wells, you don't have to maintain anything, and you got somebody sending water to you and you just pay, and you're usually one of their biggest users, so you can negotiate a rate with them that's acceptable. Then that city wants to start growing. Little community gets another industry that may be a car manufacturer or plastics manufacturer or something like that. We're starting to see those issues somewhere. And again, I'll get to this a little bit later, but some of our public water supplies in Alabama are under pressure for different reasons. Then the peak flow rate, it's not enough to just have water. You have to have a lot of water when you need it. That is one challenge I've heard from our poultry folks. Cattle, big business in Alabama as well. About 1.2 million head of cattle in Alabama. It's a $2.5 billion economic impact. We don't have many of these 50-degree days in Alabama. Most of them are down here. So a cow nursing a calf, 20 gallons a day in 95-degree heat. You're looking at, even when it's 65, full grown or getting full 11 gallons of cow. Pulp and paper industry. Our forestry industry is the largest of the agricultural sectors. We rank second in the U.S. in pulp and paper production, number 7 nationally in lumber production. It's kind of our bright spot in a lot of ways. There have been some tree disease issues in British Columbia, other parts of Canada, that because of their growing seasons and everything, the southeastern United States timber industry could really explode in the next few years. We're kind of excited about that. But it requires water. Pulp and paper industry requires 54 cubic meters of water per metric ton of finished product. Roughly, that's 14,000 gallons of water to get 1 ton of paper. One thing I have learned in our water discussions in Alabama is that we got to be careful about consumption versus use. Some of the industry people really hit on this because, a lot of that water is used for a very short period of time. It's not consumed and taken out of the cycle. Much same as our, you could say, for our ag water, but here, it's literally just minutes before some of this is cleaned and put back into the rivers. Of course, because of the wastewater issues, that's going to lead to things that water quality issues. We got to make sure that that water is being treated, because it doesn't matter if you have water everywhere if it's bad water and it can't be used for anything. This is where things get very simple, which again, usually legally that's good, but sometimes it causes problems in Alabama. And I'm going to just make this very elementary. As far as surface water goes, if you are a riparian landowner, if you own the land that touches the water, you can pretty much use it. If my tract of land is inland, maybe only 100 yards, but I don't touch the river, I have no legal right to get to it. You don't have to let me pump across you to irrigate my field. Alabama became a state in 1819. I've heard some of the real estate interest in the state say, well, you know, that's the way it's been here. It's what everybody's used to. It's the way it's going to be, because every land transaction that's ever occurred in the state of Alabama since we became a state was based on riparian rights. And, you know, they're right. Water touching the Alabama River is more expensive. I mean, land touching the Alabama River is more expensive than land that's off the river. This is where the courts get involved. A person can use the water, but they cannot unreasonably injure other riparian owners. That means that if let's just imagine a river running through here. If my land's right there and I'm using the water, I can't unreasonably injure you when it runs by you. You've still got to have enough water to use. People say, well, Patrick, what does that mean? That means that y'all are either good friends or family or something, and he will let you do what you want to, or in a good year, there's so much water coming down the river that you can pump and he can pump and everybody's fine. Nobody has any problems. But there will be a day where we don't have that luxury in Alabama as our population grows. In groundwater, we follow the reasonable use rule. This is where our municipal water supplies possibly start getting squeezed. With groundwater, to use the water, you have to be a landowner above the aquifer. All right, so I'm a visual person, so here's the aquifer. I've got to have land over it or that touches it. I can't be way over here. Some of our aquifers, and the Geological Survey of Alabama does a great job of having all this marked out and everything, and so they're smart enough that they don't need me to try to help them figure that out because I'd mess it up. But, you know, they can show where some of our aquifers in the same areas, they don't discharge back into each other. Because that's one reason behind this. One kind of scientific reason behind this is theory there is that if you pump water out and use it, it drains back in. So the owners above the aquifer will use the water, it will recharge the aquifer. Has to be for a beneficial use. Simply put, the court a long time ago decided in Alabama that beneficial use means you're not wasting it and you're using it to make money. It's interesting that as much as some of our ag stakeholders don't want to talk about water sometimes, or we think everything's all right, the two biggest cases in the state of Alabama, Adams v. Lang and Martin v. the City of Linden, both involve farmers. They're about the only two, when I say modern, I'll talk about after the 1900s water cases. We have some from the mining industry back in the 1800s, but Adams v. Lang was a good old farmer versus farmer fight. You had a family that lived in the western portion of Alabama, huge ag area, great land, lots of water. Family had a farm, had been there forever, running cattle, raising pecans. Guy moved in, Mr. Lang moved in, decided he wanted to become a farmer. I believe it was his second career. He bought up a bunch of property. He's going to raise catfish. Catfish is a big industry in Alabama, and especially at this time, it was kind of growing. Everyone was looking into it. Mr. Lang dug a well. His well was deeper than the Adams well. Everything was fine for a few years, and we had a couple years of drought. And those water tables started getting lower. Well, Mr. Lang's well was deeper, it was newer, it pumped more, and he was, well, Judge, I need this water for my catfish farm. I'm putting people to work. I'm trying to make a living. I'm making an investment in this county. Adams's argument is the same thing, that we were here first. We've been doing this forever. There ought to be some way we can both do this. Court decided that Mr. Lang wasn't wasting the water. He was an above ground owner, so he was entitled to use water out of that aquifer. People didn't really, outside of this area, people didn't really pay attention or worry about it that much. It was just something happening over there in West Alabama. You know how that happens. A few years later, we have, and you're starting to see this here, the City of Linden. Linden's a very small community in West Alabama. They had a water supply for their city that was a well coming from an aquifer. Their aquifer got drawn down too low, and saltwater intrusion came into the freshwater well and basically made it unusable. There's actually It surprised me. I didn't really fully understand this till I was on up into college and heard people talk about it. But there are a few saltwater aquifers in west central Alabama, and we actually have, I know one, there may be two shrimp producers inland in Alabama that are growing shrimp in saltwater ponds. They're pumping saltwater out of those saltwater aquifers and using it. Of course, saltwater is not good for your municipal use. So the city of Linden, and this is one of those, everybody did it with the best of intentions. I do believe in the case law says that. City of Linden said, we got to find some water for our community. So they went and bought a piece of property 10 or 15 miles outside the city limits. And it was over an aquifer that had plenty of fresh water. And they were going to put in a pumping station and pump the water and then pump it back into the city of Linden and sell it. Because they were in the meantime, they were being forced to buy water from another municipal water supply company. And, they wanted their own to get back into their own water business. Martins were farmers. And Miss Martin said, city of Linden's going to come out here and start drawing water out of this aquifer, and they're going to start growing, and they're going to recruit industries, and they're going to keep wanting to pump all this water, and they're going to pump it 10, 15 miles down the road. It's going to get used in the city of Linden. It's going to get discharged. It's not going to come back into my aquifer. I'm not going to be able to farm the way we always have. Of course, the city and the spot where they argued, well, look, we're talking about drinking water. We're talking about people's lives, trying to recruit industry in here to put people to work. Judge said, I hear you, understand, but Ms. Martin is going to win because of our reasonable use laws, and you, city of Linden, even though you bought that little acre there, you're not really a landowner that's over the aquifer, and the water has to be used on that aquifer. So that's sort of where we got our second level there. The only statutes we really have, and I want to go over this really quickly. In 1993, there was an effort to come up with a water policy system for Alabama. The biggest creation of that was the Office of Water Resources. The Office of Water Resources monitors, they don't regulate. A lot of people said, well, what does that mean? In fairness to everybody at OWR, they monitor, they do not regulate. They will say, well, there is a person that is using more than 100,000 gallons of water per day on the Alabama River. That person's supposed to request a certificate of use, which I don't work for OWR, but my understanding of this process is that legally right now, OWR will simply go to that landowner and say, hey, we think you're using more than 100,000 gallons of water per day. You need to fill out this form, and we need to give you a certificate of use just so we can know where the large users are. There is no fee. There is no monitoring. We do have a drought management plan that passed the legislature last year that will kind of let them have a little more authority if it is a declared drought emergency. But basically, this was just done to gather data and try to get an idea of what we have. And that's sort of our struggle in Alabama, and I think a lot of other states, is we have to do assessments. We've heard the checkbook analogy earlier today. I use that in these meetings all the time. We cannot balance our checkbook, and we cannot see what we have to do unless we know what we have in the bank. And it's expensive, and it's time consuming. And there are some groups that don't want to do that. They just want to go ahead and control every drop of water. There are some groups that want to drag the assessment process out for 100 years because they like it the way it is. So we're going to have to find some middle ground in there. Issues to watch. Interbasin transfers are when you pump surface water and use it within that surface water, within that basin, but it's further down or further up, but it drains back into the river. That's not as big of a problem as interbasin transfers, which is where some of our municipal water supplies are getting hit from both sides. You got the groundwater ones that can only use their aquifers, and they've got to do this balance of drawing out of the aquifer but not letting the salt water in. On the surface side, they've got to be careful about interbasin transfers. Let me go back. Sorry for the PowerPoint shuffle here, but if you'll notice in North Alabama, there's a whole lot of rivers, different ones. I'm not going to call these mountains because people that live in states with mountains will laugh at me, but this is the hilly part of Alabama, all right? And you can take water from right here. It go through a processing plant and a municipal water supply. It gets sold to this customer, sold to that one, And before you know it, you've crossed 3 or 4 ridges in 20 or 30 miles, and it's going into a whole different river. So these downstream users have valid arguments of people up here are taking water out of the river. We're not getting the use of it, which is hurting our water quality and our water quantity, and it's getting dumped over here into this river. And so there's a fairly large movement right now in the legislative climate in Alabama to do something to prevent interbasin transfers. We have, believe the stat is somewhere around 1/4 of the population of the state of Alabama lives below a line that's drawn roughly through Clanton, right in through here. So 3/4 of the population of Alabama lives up there, where those interbasin transfers are a big deal. Our groundwater is not in North Alabama as much. It's not as easy to get to as the groundwater in South Alabama because of the terrain up here. So you have some of these small municipalities that are really concerned about this. Dr. Frazier, I'm not going to throw out a percentage because I'll mess it up, but I mean, how much of our poultry industry is in this general area?
Yeah, it's probably 75%.
Right. So a lot of these guys and gals up here that are our biggest poultry producers and the processing plants are getting their water off of municipal water supplies. That this interbasin transfer stuff could really hurt. But you understand the concern. I mean, it's everything from lake house owners on houses that bought, they bought houses on a lake down here, and they're saying, well, look, even during the fall when they're supposed to be building up the water levels, there's so much being pulled out that our lakefront house is now off the water. You have a lot of industry located on these rivers. The only fully navigable river in Alabama that we send barge traffic up and down is the Tom Bigby Waterway, which is over here. So all that is dependent on large quantities of water. So people don't want to touch that. Another couple of things just to think about today. Dr. Slayton mentioned the Water Agencies Working Group. Governor Bentley created the Water Agencies Working Group to kind of pick back up where things got left off in 1993. The Department of Agriculture, the Office of Water Resources, Geological Survey of Alabama, the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, and ADEM, which is our Alabama Department of Environmental Management. Those agencies with some other groups have been tasked to, let's kind of go back and get public education. Let's get this back on people's minds. Remind people in South Alabama, or not remind maybe, but educate people in South Alabama about the issues going on in North Alabama. Because they're different. I neglected to show you all this, but Dothan, Alabama is right here. Dothan's by Alabama standards, big city. It's got about 80,000 people that live in it. Fort Rucker is right there, so there's a huge military presence there. When you bring all those people in and you draw a big old circle right there, you're looking at about 150, 200,000 people. The city of Dothan is close to the Chattahoochee River, but Chattahoochee River's got its own problems with water quality and quantity. So Dothan gets most of its water, as well as all these places, from groundwater, from the aquifers, because it's cheaper and easier than from the rivers. Dothan found themselves in a situation like that city of Linden case. They tried doing a little bit better, though. Their lawyers did a little bit better homework, because they didn't just buy an acre over here. They bought a continuous line of land. And so they were like, well, look, the pipeline's on our land. It's continuous. We are using it on land that we own. That didn't fly so good. So what you have, though, is one of the fastest growing areas in the state of Alabama. One of our largest areas, huge ag influence down here. And they are trying to recruit industries and grow and get more jobs, but worried about water usage. And right over here, there is just water galore. Enough water for the state of Alabama that we could use for 3,000 years, but they can't get to it. So those are the things we're going to have to address. Briefly, we hit on irrigation. Seafood's huge in Alabama. We have a very small coastline, but it's a huge industry for us. Being on the Seafood Marketing Commission, I've been able to learn that the quantity and quality of the freshwater has a huge impact down in Mobile Bay and in the surrounding areas on the seafood industry. The oyster people look at Apalachicola Bay in Florida and they just see horror. The Apalachicola Bay has, for a variety of different things that have happened to them in the last few years, they have too much salt water in the bay. And their oyster production, which employed hundreds, thousands of people, is now just about decimated. And it's going to take some time for it to build back. That's been good for Alabama seafood producers the last few years, but they're trying to learn from our neighbors' mistakes. My pastor sometimes says, don't pay the stupid tax twice. Learn, it's even better if you can learn from somebody else's. So we're trying to watch that. Know this is a huge issue here. I've been involved with Dr. Frazier some on possible rules in Alabama and just making sure we've got a plan in place. But with avian influenza and migratory birds, Alabama's not on a huge flyway like Arkansas or Mississippi. But again, referencing back to that map, a lot of our major rivers and lakes are up in North Alabama, where our poultry industry is. That's where the ducks come in. They either come in there or they fly through West Alabama and end up down around Mobile. I like to duck hunt, so I thought this was interesting. I had a friend that he harvested a banded wood duck that was tagged up in, a band was put on it in, I believe it was Ontario, one of the Canadian provinces. And website that was on the website, on the band, he went and entered his information. He shot it in Dallas County, Alabama, so kind of central Alabama, a little bit west of Montgomery. About 2 days before that, someone north of Shreveport, Louisiana, had shot a wood duck that was banned on the exact same day at the exact same place. Like, because it was kind of neat. You could search them by the band numbers. So that's how wide these things spread out. Here's a very interesting website. But if you just Google bands across North America, U.S. Fish and Wildlife has a website that Dr. Frazier and I looked at one day. It's very useful depending on the mood you're in. When we're talking about this AI stuff, it's also kind of scary, because you can pick birds that were banded in a flyway up north, and then you can click on species and you can click on your state, and it will show you how many banded birds have been retrieved from those locations in your state. And I mean, in Alabama, which we're not on a major flyway, again, I want to stress that, but there were birds that were banded in Alaska that ended up in Alabama, and there were birds that were banded in British Columbia that ended up in Alabama. And so, that's just how wide they spread, because it's funny. I have a friend that works for Ducks Unlimited, and I was talking with him about this issue, and he said, geez, like, people just, wig out sometimes when they realize those birds don't look at those maps on those flyways and stick to them. They go where they want to go. So, and that's one of those things that we know, but, a lot of times people don't. It really is, since I have been at the Department of Agriculture, it has really been eye-opening to the generational gap that Aubrey talked about. And I can see that in my family. About 4 generations ago, they either grew it, fished for it, or went hunting for it. That's what we had, and you made it. My little boy now, I try to get him out of the Prattville, Montgomery area every weekend just so he can go to Granddaddy's house, or my father-in-law, or my dad's house, and get to see tractors and stuff anymore. There are a lot of boys and girls in his class that aren't doing that because they're even farther removed than we are now. And driving up here, it was one of those, we had a conversation in the car about, 10 miles down the road, there's huge agriculture producing areas. But you have men and women, boys and girls living 2 miles, a 2-mile radius of this hotel that probably have no idea that those cornfields are actually money, that people go to work, and how important they are to us. Don't want to be too dramatic about it, but as a political science major, you see things change, but things sort of stay the same. And nations have risen and fallen on food, water, and natural resources. That's where it comes down to. The CIA monitors water levels in various reservoirs in China and the Middle East because they know that a drop in those is going to mean crop reductions that dropped, and that's going to, and then prices are going to go up, or there's going to be shortages, and that's going to lead to civil unrest. So with everything else going on in the world, agriculture is still there. Aubrey mentioned something I wrote in my notes, and going to try to remember that, is I think is a profound statement. Is for the first time probably ever in human history, agriculture is having to say that we're important. kingdoms wanted land so they could grow. Rome fought for water and food. I mean, that was just understood. You had to be able to feed your people, and now we're kind of thinking that Walmart and Publix and Kroger and everybody just shows up with the food trucks and everything's good. So we have to remember that we're not talking among ourselves when we're out in other groups. And I see it with our legislative leaders. We've got good legislators, but you've got leaders in Alabama now that, again, don't understand that those pine trees in their district are the reason there's a mill in their town that employs 1,000 people. So you kind of have to connect the dots for folks. But I think that if we can bring them together with partners with us, we're better off than getting into fights with everybody all the time, because unfortunately there's also less of us than there's ever been.